You're listening to the Fed and Fearless podcast. On today's episode, I'm chatting with Allison Roman about how to shift your subconscious for growth, transformation, and healing. So stay tuned. Welcome to the Fed and Fearless podcast. I'm your host, Laura Schoenfeld, a registered dietitian, nutrition business coach, and online entrepreneur with over 10 years of experience in online business. And I'm here to show you everything I've learned about creating a life and a business that nourishes you. On this podcast, we'll talk about the lifestyle habits, practical strategies, mindset shifts, and leaps of faith required to build a healthy body, a powerful mind, a strong spirit, and a successful business. Hey there, welcome back to the Fed and Fearless podcast. I'm your host, Laura Schoenfeld, and we have a super great conversation for you today. The interview is a little longer than usual, so I'm going to jump straight into the intro so we can get right into it. Allison Roman is my guest today. She is a transformation coach and holistic healing practitioner who helps women get unstuck and release what's holding them back from living their best life. By fusing subconscious reprogramming with practical lifestyle tools for empowered healing, Allison guides people to step into their power and create the life that they desire. She's been trained in numerous holistic methodologies and has been teaching and coaching in the wellness industry for over 15 years. You'll find her work focuses on the intersection of mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual well-being for aligned and authentic living. And Allison is one of my clients in my Nutrition Business Accelerator program, so it was really cool to get to chat with her about the work that she does, especially because it's something that is a little bit unusual for the health space, but I think it's getting more and more popular, and I have found it to be very powerful for my own life, and I'm constantly coming back to these techniques and tools to be able to make the changes I want to make. So I know that you're going to learn a lot from our conversation today. And it was just a real pleasure to chat with Allison all about subconscious reprogramming. So without further ado, here is Allison Roman. All right, everyone. Well, I am so excited to have with us on the show today, Allison Roman. Welcome to the Fed and Fearless podcast, Allison.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And before we hit record, we were talking a little bit about the topic we're covering today and how we recently had another guest come on to talk about it. And so it's going to be a little bit of a different angle, but I'm super excited because I think it's something that has made a huge difference in my life and the kind of results I'm able to get in a lot of different areas, not just business. And we're going to talk about it from more of the wellness perspective today. So Allison, tell us a little bit about how you got into working with people's subconscious.
Yeah. So I guess if I go back to the very first intro, my connection with mind body healing was when I moved to San Francisco and got into yoga and getting trained into Reiki and exploring nutrition. But in my late 20s and early 30s, I started to get some health issues that became chronic. And I was really struggling with eczema and anxiety. I was just I was a walking rash and just exploding all the time with really weak immune system. And so I went down the rabbit hole of physical health with functional medicine, which is where you came on my radar, right? And went down the rabbit hole of that. And so I got trained in functional nutrition and herbalism and did so much for my health. I was doing all the things, the diets, the heavy metal protocol, fixing my gut and my adrenals and my hormones and all of that. And I made some great progress. I made some really good progress, but I felt like I was still not well. And I was still operating from fear of is that thing going to flare me? Or just wasn't feeling as well as I could be, even though my physical ailments had gone away or were really manageable. And I'd been, teaching and doing yoga and all these other things and living a really, what I thought, healthy lifestyle. So I was like, why do I still feel like this mental storm? And why am I still in these negative habits and feeling anxious and fear around all of these things when, I've done all this work on myself. So I was introduced to a lot of different methodologies with mind, body, and energy, work and NLP and Psyche. Living in San Francisco, there's a wealth of holistic healing in this area. And as I started to do that exploration, I was like, oh, this is what I need. I'm the one who's getting in my own way. I really need this. And it works. This works. And it's been so impactful, not only for my health, which has got me to where I wanted to be, and knew deep down like I could get there, but it's deeply impacted all my other areas of life, work, relationships, business, all the things. I mean, it affects everything. So it's really, really powerful stuff.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because you mentioned one of the main symptoms being skin issues. And I know when we worked together in the MBA program, I think skin issues was something that, am I correct in remembering this, that was a little bit of your niche where maybe you have like skincare products that you sell? I was going to say, I feel like I'm remembering this correctly, but I also am deeply postpartum. So yeah, I was curious to find out with the belief stuff. So the subconscious beliefs and all of that, how did that show up as skin symptoms? Or am I missing, is it more like the anxiety type of stuff that it dealt with?
Yeah, I mean, it's anxiety. It's even when like itching happens, it's like where you're at. Once you get the awareness, you're like, oh wow, I just was not even present. I went on this whole thing and it created all of these symptoms and feelings in my body. So anxiety was a huge component of that. Not to discount that my gut and hormones and all of those things as well. But there was a lot of, insecurity and self-doubt and not feeling in my worth. And even though consciously, I think I did a ton of self-help and had a lot of self-awareness. So where I was at consciously but what was happening unconsciously, there was a huge conflict there. And so I don't know if that answered your question or not, but that was definitely a missing link as to how it sort of showed up energetically and then in my skin.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I feel like for a lot of people, it's maybe easier to imagine the connection between beliefs with something like anxiety because it's more of like the mental symptom versus something physical like skin. People might be like, how does that connect to your beliefs? And you're the one that went through the experience. So I feel like you'd be the best person to explain that. But I know that I'm not a skin expert. I actually just met up with a friend, Jen Fugo, who's been on the podcast before, who her whole focus is skin. And one of the things she was talking about is that like itch cycle where the itching could actually be triggering some of the skin issues, but then the itching could be more of a habit or just something that got created because of the itch. So it's that kind of vicious cycle that you can get trapped in. But as far as the beliefs go, so you were talking about maybe some of and I always feel like when we're talking about subconscious stuff, for me, it's easier to talk about it in the context of business because I feel like for me, it's really obvious when that stuff comes up. But I haven't experienced as much of it in the health space. So what would potentially tell somebody that subconscious work was their next step for getting the final improvements in their health that they're looking for?
Yeah, I feel like anyone who's been dealing with chronic issues or chronic health and they've tried all the things, and they feel like they're still stuck. And I think that's where it's really important to not to go beyond the physical and look at the mental and emotional root causes that may be contributing to what's going on physically. So you've tried all the things. I think that's really important. Or you have improvement, but you still don't feel like healthy in your mind and in your heart. Maybe you're still rolling out anxiety or, whatever the unhealthy pattern or belief or even just emotions that are happening, even though your physical ailments are gone. Those are really, two areas where it's like, okay, if we're talking about holistic healing, we have to go beyond the physical and, that mental and emotional and spiritual, whatever that means to, everybody has a different version of that, is where, we can really become whole in ourselves and integrate all those parts of ourselves that we try to suppress or ignore or, push down because we're not accepting of them. So those are really the two that I see most frequently is, like I've done all the things and I'm still here, even though it's a little bit better, or I'm on the other end, but I'm still dealing with all of, the mental emotional aspects.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I feel like especially with something like a skin issue where not only does it affect how you feel physically and, itching and stuff is not, it's pretty awful if you have an ongoing itchiness and that's just something that is affecting you on a daily basis. But then also the appearance thing, which especially unfortunately as women, I feel like it's even more impactful to us in the way that we're showing up in the world when we have skin issues that are, we're maybe self-conscious about it, or we're like, oh, are people looking at me? Are they seeing my skin rash as opposed to seeing me as a person? And I can imagine that even if the rash is no longer there, that there's still either like, again, those beliefs that got formed about what people think of you or how people are interacting with you, or that fear of, oh my gosh, I can't do one wrong thing or this rash is going to come back. And I can imagine that living like that, where you're just like on a, this hair trigger at any moment, I could like make a wrong step and this is all going to come back. I feel like that in and of itself would be a really unpleasant way to live as far as quality of life and really maximizing your ability to live your life the way you want to. So are you saying that both of those are things that the subconscious beliefs were affecting, or was there one more than the other that you feel like it was showing up for you? Hopefully that makes sense. I was mentioning to Allison before we hit record, my baby just is in her 4 months and like not sleeping very well. So if I sound like I don't know what I'm talking about, it's because I have not slept very well this week. But hopefully that question makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm like, what specifically was the question? Well, I think there's a lot of different ways it can roll out, but even in terms of our beliefs, what we believe is possible, we'll experience, and so even in the world, if we take it out of skin and we look at diagnosis, right? And if you give that diagnostic or the test results to different doctors, you're going to get different perspectives, right? Based on their experience. That's a perfect example of like beliefs, right? And how they're impacting ourselves. So if we get a diagnosis, what do we believe is possible for our healing? And if do we feel limited in that, or do we feel optimistic? Because wherever we are in our beliefs of that is really going to determine our results. And so that can be really positive, right? And keep you on track and keep you motivated and get you where you want to be. Or it can be really victimizing, right? If you're like, oh, I have this and the doctor told me this, right? Even though you might not know what's possible. Maybe you haven't witnessed that. You've never heard it from someone else, or maybe you're like, that doesn't sound right. Actually, I feel like I could heal, So wherever you are on the perspective of your beliefs is really going to determine your experience and your results.
This is interesting because I think this came up on my interview with Megan, which would have been a few episodes back from this one coming out, where I have a client inside of our NBA program who one of the questions that she asked was, how do I navigate? Because she's in the fertility space. And I'm sure you can imagine that when you're helping women get pregnant, you don't want to be like, getting their hopes up and telling them something's going to happen when it may not. But the dark side of that, if you're trying to be like, I'm not going to promise that this is going to happen. The dark side is if you're saying, well, it may not, and you're kind of like not creating the belief that it will, that in and of itself can actually impact the results somebody gets. So it was this interesting conversation around the marketing piece to talk about what you can help people with, where you're trying to balance like being ethical and not promising something that you obviously can't guarantee, but also being okay with speaking to possibility and speaking to what can happen, even if it's not 100% guaranteed to happen, and how that, like creating that belief for a client that's, dealing with a health issue or, dealing with infertility or whatever the challenges that they're experiencing, creating the belief that it is possible, that other women have done it, that your body's not broken, all of the messages that, having been in the fertility space for a long time, I know a lot of women would get those messages from their doctors where it's like, you're infertile. I mean, even the word infertile is like a belief, right? And so I just thought that was an interesting thing that came up because, again, I think as practitioners, part of our job is to help our clients believe that they can get a result. Because if you're like constantly saying, well, it may not happen, then, you might actually be like having a self-fulfilling prophecy there where you're shutting down the possibility of the experience because you're telling them, well, it might not happen. Which I know is different than some of the healthcare providers that are like, this will never happen and you'll never get pregnant on your own, which, a lot of people have experienced. So all of that said, as someone who does work in the health space or has dealt with their own health issues, how does the belief that healing is possible affect the actual result of healing?
Yeah, I actually, I love that you brought this up because I think there's a lot of stigma around being healed. And if we just take that concept, being healed, that means different things to different people. And does that mean you're 100% never going to be sick ever again in your whole life? Well, sick could mean a cold, a flu. You got in a bike accident and broke your foot. So all of these things. So it's like, well, what does it mean to us? Because we all have different perceptions of that. So I think whatever the belief is that it's realistic to that person, regardless of what diagnosis or what the issue or ailment that they're working with. Being healed or, going through that healing is really dependent not only on their beliefs, but like what that means to them. What is that going to give them? And yeah. And like, I could keep going.
So yeah, I actually would love to keep going on that because I'm curious, when you say that there's a lot of stigma around healing, can you just tell me more about what that might look like from a concrete, 3D perspective? What does that look like showing up in people's lives?
Yeah, well, I think people think that they in order to be healed, right, they have to be 100% free of whatever the ailment is, or something is in remission or whatever. And healing is it's a perception. It's a perspective. So it's like that means different things to different people. And you could, when you're working with the physical body, it's doing so many different things, right? All of the time. And it's doing the best it can with the resources that it has. So I don't, what was the question again? We might have
just how that might show up in somebody's either their symptoms or their experience where there's a stigma around healing. Because I think one of the things I've heard as far as subconscious beliefs are concerned is that for a lot of people, there's something wrapped up in being sick that is serving them in some way. And so it's like there's some block for them to actually let go of the illness. And I don't know if that's what you were talking about. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. But I know that was what came to mind when it came to the stigma around healing. But yours might be the other side of it where maybe, the beliefs around what it means to be healed is preventing someone from actually stepping into that identity. Is that,
absolutely.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. But I think you raise a good point. I mean, part of it is the perfectionism, right? And what we have perceived as our healed self. And it's oh, is it perfect? And then I'm never going to have all of these things. And the human condition is that we go through challenges, we go through transformation, right? Anytime we are transforming or up leveling in any way, we're undoubtedly going to get discomfort and challenge and go into those deep, dark places, because that's how we get to where we want to be. That's how we become the higher version of ourselves. And at the same time, there can be a secondary gain. I think what you're speaking to being okay, if I'm healed, I might not get this attention from my spouse, or, that means I have to actually step into my role and running the business the way that I should be doing. Right. So it can also be that there's a gain to us being sick. And so, but it's usually happening at the unconscious level. So we're not aware that it's happening.
Yeah. I mean, most people probably don't have that conscious thought of well, if I heal, then that means I have to, show up more fully in my life. And that sounds scary. So I'm going to stay sick. I mean, maybe there's some people that think that consciously, but I think most people probably would not be thinking that, at least that audible voice in our heads that we identify as our conscious thoughts. So, and I think the subconscious piece shows up in so many different ways. A lot of the stuff that I used to work with was around body image and kind of that orthorexic tendency. And I know for a lot of my clients, they got a lot of self-worth from their perfectionism or from their orthorexic tendencies. And honestly, that probably was something I dealt with when I was, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when it was peak paleo and orthorexia and all that stuff that I was going through, but it was like somehow that was creating a sense of self-worth to have that diet as an identity. And I feel like for a lot of people, even if something's not working for them anymore, they have a hard time letting go of it or shifting or really listening to what their body is telling them because they've built up this belief around, what is the right way to eat and who am I if I'm not, following this diet. And honestly, it was something that I think I'm kind of glad that we got at. Well, I shouldn't say we got out of that. I got out of that. And I think a lot of my friends in the paleo space got out of that. But it was like, there was a good solid 5 to 10 years where I feel like people literally, their identity was the diet that they were following. And I know there still are people that are like that, but I feel like it's less common, at least in the circles I run in. But I do think, that identity piece is something that a lot of times people are not paying attention to when it comes to their health behaviors. And they feel like, oh, it's just, I'm just trying to be healthy. I'm just trying to eat well. I'm just trying to exercise. But they don't realize there's all these beliefs about who they are and how valuable they are and, how they compare to other people that are all wrapped up in the decisions that they're making there.
100%. I mean, that was what I spoke to earlier. What got me kind of into this was I was like, okay, I tried the paleo thing, I tried the AIP, I did all these things, but then I was living in fear of trying all these other things and became really controlling about my life. And I was like, this does not feel fun. This is not what I thought healing would feel like. Right. And so I had to really go deeper and explore okay, well, what's actually real and what is actually just my perception and my belief. And so, I mean, I think that's really very present. Even now we're seeing that in health and wellness circles because polarization is very appealing. It's like people really like to identify with their beliefs because it validates, their unconscious. And that's one of the roles of the subconscious mind, right? It's like it generalizes, it deletes, and it distorts information for the sake of learning, for the sake of keeping us in the comfort zone. And, one of the biggest roles of the subconscious is okay, well, procreation and just keeping us safe, and so it's such a huge part of wellness. And I think that, addressing those mental and emotional aspects are really going to help people just feel more whole and connect you to your inner resources. Because it's like when you're constantly, seeking validation for whether it's your diet or your diagnosis or whatever it is, you're not listening to what's going on inside, right? And your greatest teacher and guru in medicine is your inside. It's you. And so that's what I'm really big on. And my one-to-one work is really empowering people to connect to their inner resources. Let's deal with the mental, emotional baggage that's there so that you can integrate all of this and really move in a way that's aligned, where your head and your heart and your body are all congruent. Because that's what the magic is.
And a few minutes ago, you mentioned the concepts of, it was generalization, right? Was the first one. Deletion and distortion. I wanted to make sure I had those words right. I was like, I think those are the ones that she said because I've learned this stuff before, but I'm not the expert in this. Could you give our listeners maybe a little bit of concrete examples? Because I think when we talk about this stuff, when it's people that have been in the world for a while, whether it's, you're very submerged in it because it's something that you teach others and it's something that I'm exposed to very frequently in the business side of stuff. But, when we're talking about deletion, distortion, I think it would be helpful for people to understand, what does that actually look like so that they could start recognizing when they're doing it. So I don't know if you could give an example for all three or maybe just one of them, just so people can know what we're talking about. Because I think, it can get really easy to just talk about this stuff when you're used to hearing about it. But there might be some people listening that are like, what does this mean?
Yeah, I love this. So, a good example so the unconscious mind can take in a ton of information, up to 2 million bits. I think they say even more now of information, but the conscious mind cannot handle that. It's around 260 or something like that, bits of information. So all of the information in our conscious mind is coming from our unconscious. So it has to generalize, delete, and distort information for the sake of learning. And so think of this as like your filing cabinet on your Mac or whatever kind of laptop that you have, right? It's just sort of sorting all of our emotions and memories and putting these things in categories so that we can just access it more easily for the sake of like staying alive. So for one example of generalizing would be if you walk outside, I'm in Pacific Palisades, I'm dog watching a friend's dog. And there's tons of dogs in the neighborhood. But if I went outside and went for a walk and came back and my friend was here and I would be like, oh, we just went for a walk. We ran into so-and-so. I would just be very general, right? Oh, they had a really cute puppy, But what's actually happening at the unconscious level is like, okay, that's a Cocker Spaniel. It's about 8 years old. It's got red hair. She's wearing a purple shirt. There's the leash, all the trees outside. It's windy outside. So you see all the information that's really going on a dog walk, right? But what am I assessing? Okay, so this neighbor is walking the dog. Very super general, right? I'll give a personal example of deletion. I went and got a massage. I was visiting my parents in Austin. And before I left for this massage, I was like, should I wear my wedding ring or not? Because I'm just going to get the massage, so I don't really need to put it on. Went and got the massage. I'll tell you what I decided. Went and got the massage. And after the massage, I went to the table and put on my necklace. And I was like, my wedding ring is not there. Started freaking out and looked at the massage therapist. And I'm like, my ring, you saw me put my ring here. Like, do you remember? And she was like, oh, yeah. She's like, was it silver or was it gold? And so I started explaining it. We had the flashlight and we were looking for it. And I was freaking out. There was a huge rainstorm. I called my mom. I'm like, can you find it on the table? And she can find it. So I get back home and I'm looking through my videos because I made a reel this morning. And I'm like, was I wearing it? Da-da-da. And I completely just left my wedding ring there. It was at my mom's house. It was there the whole time during the massage, but I had deleted it, right? And then I implanted into my massage therapist that she saw it too, even though she didn't.
Yeah.
So I just was expecting it to be there. And then when I went there, it was just like, another example is when you're looking for your house keys and you're like talking to your friend or your partner and you're like, where are the keys? And it's like, they're on the table. And you're like, I just looked there. And it's like, no, I just saw them on the table. And you go back and then they're there. Well, you were probably just walking around in a hypnotic state because we're in autopilot most of the time anyways. And so that was your brain just deleting them. And distortion is really just how we project out. It's like we things are really based off the past and we're projecting those out into the future. So it's not really real what's happening right now. So I tell people get really curious about your beliefs and your thoughts and everything that's going on and sort of zoom out and ask questions because you're filtering it all, from your subconscious. So you're distorting it based on your memories, your emotions, and your experiences, and a lot of, modeling that you got growing up.
I feel like the distortion one is the one that I feel like comes up all the time. And I shouldn't say causes the most problems, but it's kind of like the one that can be really sneaky because I feel like that one's the one where it's almost a lens that you're looking at the world through. And you're just, the things that you're seeing, you're like, this is what I'm seeing. This is the reality. And then you find out like, that's not reality. And a lot of times all it takes is a good question, right? It's like, is that really what happened? Like, let's walk through the actual events and see, was that true? I mean, it's so funny. This happens with, I feel like marriage is a great place to practice this stuff, right? Because it's like, I'll say something and my husband will get upset. And I'm like, why are you upset? And he's like, oh, because you got mad at me. I was like, I didn't get mad at you. I literally just asked the question. And it was just because the tone was a tone that he's not, used to. Because in his family, they don't raise their voice kind of thing. I was just speaking loudly. It's like, that kind of thing. So I feel like knowing that stuff can be really helpful in a lot of different areas of life. Just because it's, in a weird way, I almost feel like it helps you respond more appropriately. So even with the wedding ring example, something like that happened to me recently where we had gotten home from a trip and I couldn't find this jewelry bag that I have. And I was freaking out because my husband bought me this really nice pearl bracelet that was a push present. And I was like, oh my gosh, like and it's just stuff, right? If I lost it, it's not the end of the world, but I would have felt really bad. And so I was getting all this anxiety. I'm like, I don't know where I put it. Maybe I left it at the hotel in South Carolina. Maybe, I dropped it in the rental car that we were driving. Maybe the housekeeper took it. Like, all the different scenarios were going through my head. And I was trying to think, like, why can't I remember where I put this thing? And of course, having just had a baby, I'm like, my brain is not working. And so I had to really take a pause for a second and be like, okay, let me just let my brain remember when's the last time I saw that bag, or where did I put it? Because I think trying to figure it out was stressing me out, and then making me think about all these other things that it could have had happen. Turns out my husband had actually I had put it in a bag that we brought with us, and my husband had taken that bag and put it in another room, in another closet, because he thought it was empty. So I had never actually unpacked it, because my brain was I swear I don't remember where I put it. Where did I put it? Where did I put it? And then I gave myself permission to say, maybe I didn't put it somewhere. Right. And so that was when I was like, oh my gosh, I remember I put it in this backpack. Where was that backpack? I didn't take it out of the backpack. So then we went and found the backpack, and there it was. So it was a funny thing where, had I just kept freaking out about where did I put it? Where did I put it? As opposed to just kind of pausing and giving my brain the opportunity to bring up the information that was pertinent. That was when I found it. So I don't know if that's exactly what we're talking about here, but it kind of felt like that, where my subconscious knew where it was, but my conscious brain was trying to make the decision about where did I put it? Where did I put it? As opposed to just letting myself remember, oh, you didn't actually put it anywhere because you didn't unpack it. So where did you pack it in the first place? It was taking a step back and finding the original place I remembered seeing it. So I know it's kind of a random story, but I feel like that's something that learning about subconscious beliefs and thought processes and stuff actually does change the way I operate in my day-to-day life with those kind of things. So I don't know if that's been your experience, where you can actually kind of see yourself starting to do those more, maybe problematic thought process habits, and you can kind of catch yourself and stop and be like, wait a second, let me get back to the things that I know about how the subconscious works, and actually use that in a positive way, as opposed to using it in this super anxious, frenzied, oh my gosh, I can't find it. And now I'm going to have to explain to my husband that I lost this thing that he bought 2 months ago for me. So am I on the right track here as far as what this stuff can do for you in the day to day?
Yeah, 100%. It really puts you, I tell my clients, it puts you in your peace and power. Because you have way more perspective and possibilities, and it makes you a clearer communicator too. Cause it's let me zoom out. I'm always practicing zooming out, and I'm question everything, question your thoughts, question your emotions, everything is well, what is it that I could be missing? Or what is it that I'm not seeing? And I feel like that keeps me in a place of curiosity, which is actually way more empowering than assuming that I know all the things, that can lead you in all these patterns that are just repetitive, when it's actually there's other possibilities that are there. So it's so fun once you start to get into this work. And even after, removing some of your own limiting beliefs or negative emotions, it's really illuminating how you were versus how you are. You're just in a state that's much more aligned and able to respond and notice things and kind of get your control back. You gave a perfect example where you were oh, okay, let me just pause for a minute and check in, get into my inner resources, right? And see what's there, which is, it's so empowering. So I love this work. It keeps you humble. I'll say that for sure. And the other piece is, with releasing negative emotions from the past, which is, there's a technique, MER, that I use that is so, so effective. It really builds your emotional intelligence, because you're not moving from this old emotional baggage from the past anymore. You're able to actually experience something that may be challenging or triggering, and you can process and feel your emotions and then release it much more easily than if it's old baggage that just keeps sort of building. So I tell people, I'm okay, if something's happening and you're triggered and your response feels way out of alignment with what's happening in the moment, like just way too charged, then it's probably emotional baggage. It's probably from the past.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Mm-hmm.
I think, that's the other element I think it's so helpful to is that it's, teaching us to process our emotions and feel them and explore them, because emotions are just information and
Mm-hmm.
energy, and anything that's happening at the unconscious or subconscious. I use those words interchangeably. It's really coming up for our healing and integration. So,
Mm-hmm.
we can stay optimistic and stay in that place of potential and opportunities and possibility, or we can go into victim mode. And that's where we just continue staying in the loop. So I love this work.
Mm-hmm.
It impacts so many areas of your life. And it gives you, so much peace and power to really like move in a way that's aligned with that higher version of yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's been really interesting going into motherhood with this background in the last several months, because I'm not going to lie and say, oh, everything's so chill and I'm just in my peace and power all the time. Like, there's definitely times where, I'm stressed, I'm exhausted. It's like I'm not operating at my highest intellectual capacity, or, the emotions are not appropriate for the circumstances. But I do think, I have a lot of people in my life right now that are going through a similar, uh, motherhood transition, I guess we would call it. And what I find really interesting is there's a lot of women who I think get so much more stressed about motherhood because they're like looking externally for all the information and the right answers. And it's hard, when you're responsible for another person, and there's all this expectations from our society about what is it to be a good mother and what's the right thing to do, what's the wrong thing to do. And everybody's got a different opinion. And I feel like this is relevant to the health conversation too, where it's like one person saying you should co-sleep with your baby inside of your bed with you. And the other person's like, the baby is going to die if you take a nap next to them or something. Right. And it's like this super polarizing, stressful, like, what's the right thing to do here? And, for me, I think it's been an interesting experience to really take what I've learned through the process of entrepreneurship to really a whole new level with motherhood, because I feel like the stakes are higher. I feel like, the physical stressors of being woken up and, having my energy going towards breastfeeding and that kind of thing makes it harder to, go back to like the conscious, like decision making of I'm going to react in a different way here. But I do think I've been able to handle this transition a lot better than I even expected. And I think because I don't necessarily get caught up in all the external noise that's coming at me when it comes to making decisions about what to do with the baby. And again, I'm not saying I'm perfect. I still struggle with this. I'm a researcher. I love finding information. I love being like, what is the right thing to do? What's the best stroller system? How do we take a baby on a plane? Like all the things. But I think I'm able to kind of catch myself when I go a little too far with that, versus I feel like a lot of women, because of the environment we're in, having babies, just like it's like overwhelming and stressful, and they don't feel like they can trust themselves, and they're not listening to their intuition about stuff. So it's been an interesting experience, because I feel like when somebody's dealing with a health problem, it's a very similar type of experience where they want somebody to tell them what to do. They feel like they don't know what's going on. They can't trust their body. They can't trust themselves. And then it turns into this like this hunt for the practitioner that has all the answers. And most people, even a really good practitioner, doesn't have all the answers, like you said. So I would love to hear a little bit about what somebody can do in that circumstance when they feel like they can't trust their own judgment and they need an expert, quote unquote, to tell them what to do. What would be some ways that they could start to come back to their own inner knowing about what to do next when it comes to, I mean, again, this could be health, this could be business. There's so many places this applies, but I do think with health challenges, it's especially valuable to be able to check in with your own like beliefs and what your body is telling you and what your intuition is telling you.
Yeah, I love that. So such an important practice, I'll say, because it's, as you noted, like if you're in survival mode, I think you're in survival mode when you're like in the first few years of like raising a baby. Oh my God, it's so much work, right? So you're inevitably going to go into autopilot, right? Because it's just like you're struggling, you don't have all your sleep, and the same thing is true for health conditions, right? Where it's like, okay, well, just consider that everything is like information and it's perspective and it's feedback, right? So it's like, okay, go and get that information, find people that align with you. Like, lab tests can be really informative and helpful. And it's a snapshot of one tiny moment in the whole scope of all of your body processes over the course of how many years you are, right? So just kind of, again, like taking that wide lens and like zooming out and being like, okay, well, what do I want to do with this information? And really it's staying curious. I tell people all the time, I'm like, stay open and curious. Because when we get in that really binary thinking and the polarization of like, oh, this means this, it could, and it might be something else, because it's like one person's poison could be someone else's potion. We know this in wellness, right? So, being really open to all of that, and also compassionate with yourself. Like if you drop the ball, or you like, you feel insecure or uncertain, like that's okay. Just do the next best thing to get you in a different place, right? So it's like part of it is testing the waters, because you get the feedback, right? And then it's like, well, okay, what do I want to do with that feedback? So any practices that are just keeping you in your awareness of staying curious and open, meditating. I mean, meditation is such a huge benefit to everybody. Everybody should be meditating. So one way or another. There's a lot of different ways to meditate. You can do it walking. You can, there's all these different styles and methods, but creating that self-awareness so that you can start to identify your patterns. So you can start to build that, intuitive muscle and kind of go in. So that's a huge practice that I really love. And listening to your body, which goes back to that, like just turning in. You gave a really good example earlier about like, okay, I just closed my eyes and was like, I need to pause. Right. And going inwards and like asking those questions, getting in touch with how your body feels and your emotions can be really, really informative. Like, where is this coming from? Or what happens if I just sit with this uncomfortable, feeling? So, and it does require you to get uncomfortable. I think that's the piece that people forget, because we're so averse to problems and discomfort and pain, which is, I mean, we all experience that in life. It's inevitable to completely avoid discomfort and challenge and pain. Completely inevitable. So, being able to be okay with that as you explore all of these different options and really just like, and practice, because you don't always get it right. And that's okay. Take that feedback and what can you learn from it? And that for me is really such an empowering place to be. Like, okay, I super effed up, or I gave my power away with this practitioner because I was feeling so weak, weak, whatever that is in that moment. So I did this and I didn't like what I got back. That's okay. How can you pivot? So just continuing to move step by step as you sort of continue to come back to yourself before you go forward.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I feel like the belief thing is so important in this process too, because if you don't believe that you can find the right answer or that you can trust yourself, I feel like that's a huge one for so many people. I mean, even whether it was the health business I was running or now that I work with entrepreneurs, a lot of that self-trust piece is not there, where they're looking for somebody else to tell them either what to do, or maybe they've figured something out, but they don't trust themselves to go for it. Like they need validation. And I think for me, something that's always served me, and this must have been a thing I developed. I don't think this is my innate personality, but just knowing that, like, it is the knowing, right? Which is a belief, but it's the knowing that I will figure it out, even if I make mistakes. I feel like that is something that people either think, oh, well, if I'm going to figure it out, that means I'm not going to make any mistakes. So if I make a mistake, that means I don't know what I'm doing and I'm not going to figure it out. Or they just don't ever get to the place where they even try to believe that maybe I will figure it out and maybe I do have the answers. And so, and again, it's not to say that you shouldn't work with people, because I think finding the right support is part of figuring it out, right? Is knowing who to ask for help, knowing who to work with, knowing who's the right fit for you to get support with your health. But it's just that idea of believing that you will find the answer that I think it seems so obvious, but the more people I work with in the different spheres, the more I realize how many women and I say women, but I feel like it's for whatever reason, women tend to struggle with this more obviously than men do, where it's that belief that you can figure it out and that you will, even if it means you're going to go through some wrong turns or bad choices or, and again, bad's relative, but like the choice you made didn't get the result you wanted. So it wasn't the quote unquote right choice. But I feel like it starts with the belief that you will eventually get to the right answer, even if it's not immediate. So I don't know if that's something that you work with your clients on, that belief that they can trust themselves, versus just being like, I can't trust myself. Everything I do is wrong, or, I'm not going to get the right outcome if I don't have somebody else tell me what to do. Have you seen that a lot in the clients that you work with?
Yeah, I think it's so important. This is where it's really important to work with someone one-on-one who's doing subconscious work, because it's below your conscious awareness. You don't realize that it's happening. And when you have someone who knows how the subconscious works, that they can really poke holes in all of the things that are happening there. And so that you can start to see for yourself. Right. Because it's like, if someone doesn't believe it, it doesn't matter what I say. It doesn't matter what I do. Like I can't manually have them change their belief just based off of saying something or doing something. But I can ask the right questions. I can do, a lot of different techniques with the subconscious mind, because it works in images, right? It works in sounds and feelings and all these different things, so that they become more aware. Because you really want to get to like, well, okay, well, where did they learn in their life that they couldn't trust themselves? Because there was one moment in their past. Remember, the unconscious has all the storehouse of memories and emotions and all of that. So there was something that happened at some point in their life where they made that decision that they can't trust themselves. So it's getting back to that moment and then disassociating. It's a total technique, but disassociating them from that process so they can take the lesson and be like, oh, that's what happened, right? And now, like, oh, actually, it's safe for me to trust myself. So, it's, I have to really like hold, I tell clients, I'm like, I'm going to hold your feet to the fire, because, when we start to get into those places in the subconscious, it's like, it's getting out of the comfort zone. It's like, that doesn't feel safe, or that feels scary. Right. And so it's through that where you have to really get that different perspective, so you can take the lessons, so you can integrate it, and then you can heal.
And I feel like the point you just brought up is really important, where you can't make somebody change their belief. And I know that came up a lot when I did the NLP training, because I think sometimes people with like hypnosis and NLP, they're like, oh, this person is going to like trick me into believing something I don't want to believe. And it can feel kind of like a little dangerous to, And I think something I remember, the trainer talking about was this idea that like you can't make somebody believe something that they don't want to believe. So you're not going to just like, like you said, mind control them and make them change without them having any awareness of what's going on. And so I do think, having somebody that can guide you through the process is really valuable, because like you said, if you're not aware of it, it's a blind spot. You don't even know it's happening. But when somebody can bring your attention to it, that gives you the opportunity to then decide, hey, that's not a belief that's serving me anymore. I'd like to change that belief. And that actually has to happen for the belief to change. You have to decide you want to change it first. So I feel like that's something important for people to realize, especially for the people who are working with clients and are like, I just want you to think differently. Like, why won't you believe this? Like, just remembering that you can't force somebody to change their beliefs, but you can guide them towards a different way of looking at things by asking really good questions. And I know with the techniques that you do, there's a very specific strategy that I remember when I was learning it, I was like, this stuff's a little weird, but it definitely is working, because I see all these people having these like huge breakthroughs. But I think it's a really cool process that people can go through to, first of all, like I said, identify those beliefs and figure out like what is going on under the surface that I'm not aware of, but then also to have a method of actually changing them in a way that sticks and isn't like you're just putting a Band-Aid on, or you're just kind of like faking it till you making it kind of mindset.
Yeah. It's so effective. And, it will continue to trickle out in other areas of your life. Whatever that belief is, it shows up in many forms. right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's effective. I tell everybody, I'm like, the unconscious is bringing it up for you to heal and learn. It also suppresses it because it's like, that's not safe. So, you can only change what you're willing to change. Everyone's responsible for their own change. Like, you can't change other people. And even with hypnosis, it's like, can I put into hypnosis? Well, yes, if they believe that they can go through it, and we go into trance multiple times, throughout the day. Trance is a very normal state. And so, but any suggestions that I make, they're only going to take the ones that feel applicable for them in that moment and that are
Mm-hmm.
aligned with their values and their beliefs. So,
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the cool part of this. It's like, it feels like magic and it's super effective. And people are like, wait, what just happened? And sometimes I have to remind people, I'm like, you would have lost your shit, 24 hours ago if this would have happened. And so sometimes when you make change happen at the subconscious too, you don't actually see your shifts until later on. You're like, oh yeah, I really would have like responded differently that time. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that's one of the cool impacts of this work. But it's helpful to have someone who can kind of like show you your blind spots and then hold you through that. But your results are solely dependent on how far you're willing to go in exploring those depths.
Mm-hmm. Now, in the interest of time, I was wondering if, and maybe this is like a conversation for another interview. The concept of timeline therapy. I don't know if you mentioned it when we had hit record, but it's something that I've heard a lot of people talk about, and I've possibly gone through it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not totally sure. Could you just do like, a 30,000 foot overview of what timeline therapy is? Because I think if somebody's never heard of it before, it can sound pretty woo.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it is really woo, but just like help our audience understand what that is. Because I think my coach has led me through something like that, and it was a very powerful experience. But I'm the kind of person that if my coach suggests that I should try something, I'm like, all right, let's do it.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm particularly trained in NER, which is mental and emotional release technique, which is similar to, it's sort of off of timeline therapy. And basically, I mentioned earlier that the unconscious is like, it stores all of your memories and emotions. So it's like all of that old programming and patterning is how we're projecting everything out. So your unconscious mind knows. So when we're able to like, whatever the belief is, let's say there's some belief of like we said earlier, like I'm not worthy or I can't trust myself. So it's going in and being like, okay, well, when was the first time that you explored this or learned this? And, when was the first time you noticed this, right? And going into that moment and really exploring everything that happened, physical, mental, emotional, like what happened, but from a like not in the experience, right? So looking at it through a different lens so that you're disassociated from it, so that you're actually like kind of like as if you were going to pull yourself out of your body and witness the movie. What's the movie? The like Christmas movie where he takes him at night. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Is it It's a Wonderful Life?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Is it? Okay.
No, when he like takes him through the like, it's like, so it's seeing it through a different lens. So you're like, oh, okay, got it. Right. So then you can actually get perspective, release the old belief and emotion around it, and then come back in the present moment and engage with it, knowing what you know now. Does that help? It's very tricky,
Yeah.
super effective. And I'm like, how do I explain this in a way that people can like digest it?
Well, and it's funny because when I don't know if I did it exactly the way that you were taught to do it with my coach, but one of the things that came up was stuff that might have happened before I was even born, which I think sometimes that's the stuff that people are like, that's weird, but I feel like it's legit. And even if we think about like epigenetics and stuff, it's like something that happened to your grandmother, you were in her body, right? Like or actually I'm trying to think like if you were the egg inside your mother when your mother was in her mother's body, like you were technically there, right? And so it's this kind of like, it sounds so woo, but then it's also, very scientific as far as there being impacts of stuff that happened in previous generations. So like, it's been cool. And it's also been a little stressful because I'll kind of joke with my husband where I'm like, I don't want to say anything to to our daughter that's going to like mess up her subconscious, or like, when I was pregnant with her, I was like, I'm trying to have all these positive thoughts so that like she doesn't come out of the womb thinking that she's like not loved or something, right? So it's like, could get a little bit neurotic about that if you're like me and you're like trying to control everything. But it is something that was really interesting as an experience, because sometimes it's like, well, I don't remember an event happening that, would have made me have this belief. But then if you think, oh, well, what if it was like your mother's belief that got passed to you, or your grandmother's belief, or something like that? And then it kind of opens up the possibility that like you're just carrying this, this way of perceiving the world that got implanted when your grandmother was 30 or something, right? So it's like, I don't know, it's just really interesting. And again, I'm so open to all the possibilities of like the ways that we can heal or experience increased performance in life, because it's something that as an entrepreneur, it's like you're always like, okay, what's the next ceiling that I've hit? What's the next thing that I got to work through? And that was a really just bizarre experience for me to go through that and be like, wow, maybe it's something that, when my mom was pregnant with me, and I know some of the things that happened, and maybe that was what created this belief that, now I get to release. So I was just curious about the timeline therapy thing, because again, I think sometimes if somebody's never heard of that or experienced it, it can be like, what are you talking about? Yeah. Something happened to me before I was even born. But I don't know. It's just the more I experience this kind of stuff, the more I'm like, well, it's working. So even if it's total placebo effect, it's still valuable, right? So that's why I like learning about it and having these conversations.
Yeah. Well, placebo is also like, that fully explains your subconscious mind.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. When we break that down, it's like, okay. So it's totally just, beliefs, in action. So I love what you said about the, ancestral and generational and past life too. Like, when I tell people, I'm like, whatever comes up, just trust it. Like when you're in the moment, whatever comes up, just trust it. Don't doubt it. Don't let your critical conscious mind get in the way, because it's here for a reason. And so, whatever you believe, then that's what will come up. And if you're doubting it, then you're not going to get the shift that you want if there's the resistance, if you're, consciously. So just people, like stay really open with that, because you never know what's really going to come through. And like you noted, it's like, oh, actually, okay, yeah, that could make sense. There's so much about, epigenetics now that it's like, oh, wow. Like it's so much bigger than, what we go through these little filters of like, oh, I need to do this to do this, and this data says this and all of this, but there's way more possibility that's beyond all of that. And if we can stay open and tap into it, then things can get really amazing and beneficial and positive and magical in a really cool way.
Yeah, I feel like sadly our schooling in this country kind of shuts a lot of that down, right? It's like everything has a right answer, and there's the scientific method. And if it's like, if you can't prove it, then it's not real or whatever. And a lot of this stuff takes a level of openness, right? You have to kind of be like, all right, this isn't something I've experienced before. This isn't how I was taught to think, but let's just see what happens. And then a lot of times that's the little snowball that we all kind of, fall into, where it's like, oh, that was really cool. What else can I do? What else can I do? And then, a few years later, you're talking about like going back in time and imagining yourself in your grandma's body or something, right? So, well, Allison, it's been so fun to chat with you, and it's making me like, oh, I should hire you or something, because it's one of those, as an entrepreneur, again, you're always like, what's holding me back now? What's holding me back now? And it's a lot of times it is the subconscious belief. So I'm so glad that you were able to come on the show and chat with me today about this really interesting topic. For our listeners who are willing to drink the Kool-Aid and see what this stuff is all about, and are not like, turning us off and being like, those ladies are so weird. Where can they learn more from you about either working with you or just how you approach this, especially in the health space?
Yeah. So I'm on Instagram, which is _Allison Roman _. I'm assuming you'll leave it in the notes. And then my website is allison-roman.com. And you can go in there and download my Unlock Your Healing Potential, which will give you some tools, some meditation and visualization to start to explore this work. I tell people, I'm like, if you don't believe it, just go play with it for a little while. Stay curious and see what happens when you start to, chime into the awareness and exploring your beliefs and your emotions and stuff like that. So Instagram, my website, download my free guide. If you are stuck in your, healing path and feeling like you want to explore the depths of your subconscious, and don't hesitate to, shoot me an email or reach out on Instagram, and we can see if it's a good fit to move forward.
Awesome. And do you primarily work with people who are struggling with physical ailments, or is there other stuff that you help people achieve?
Yeah, I do breakthrough sessions, which are my favorite. We're literally like removing all the baggage from one area of life. So that could be career or health or relationships, family or personal development. So that could be one area of life, which I really love. And then I also have another program, which is, mostly focused on physical health, but not in the sort of like, do this, do that. It's more like, prioritizing yourself and your self-care, and then getting into the beliefs and the emotions that are keeping the unhealthy patterns or choices going on.
Awesome. I love it. And we'll make sure that we are linked to the resources that you mentioned, Instagram, and that free download that you have. If you guys go to lauraschoenfeldrd.com and click the podcast tab, you can find all of the notes there. Well, thank you again, Allison. This was really fun. And I feel like whenever I talk about this stuff, it starts to become like just all about what's happening in my life currently, or how can this be applicable to the things that I'm going through, as opposed to it being like, here's your A to Z, like linear process that you're going through to fix these things. So I think it's really cool to bring some of that less linear way of thinking to these problems, because not that there's anything wrong with following a path, but I think a lot of times that does sometimes block out our ability to really tap into what our whether it's subconscious or intuition, however you want to describe it, like what it already knows. And so, I'm a very linear, process oriented thinker, as you know, being in the MBA program, and it's always good for me to like take a break from that once in a while. So I appreciate you coming on the show and chatting with me about this.
Yeah, I love it. I think that way too. I think that's why it got me into this work. I went down the rabbit hole. And then when I started to play with it and like do my own work on it, I was like, oh, this is so much more fun. And I'm making it be this like, so it's a practice for me. I don't know if it's like my astrology, like my Pisces sun and my Virgo rising, where it's like really holistic and then very linear. And it's really, it's a nice balance, because it's like, okay, information is good. Data is good. Research is good, right? It's good to be informed. It's good to do your education and check in with your inner resources and let it be intuitively guided, because there's wisdom there that we don't want to push down and repress. It's really valuable for our healing in any area of life.
Yeah, for sure. I 100% endorse that message. So, well, thank you again. And thanks to those of you for hanging out with us. We'll see you here next week on the Fed and Fearless podcast. Take care, everybody. Are you a dietitian or nutritionist business owner that wants to create an online business that consistently brings in dream clients who actually want to buy your services, but you're struggling to figure out the right business strategy to get there? Then keep listening, because I have a special opportunity that will help you create the highly profitable and impactful nutrition business that you always wanted. Inside my signature group coaching program, the Nutrition Business Accelerator, created exclusively for nutrition and dietitian entrepreneurs, you'll learn how to start, grow, and scale your online business to 6 figures and beyond, so you can experience the financial and time freedom that you desire. I created this program to help struggling nutrition entrepreneurs get clarity on who they serve, how they serve them, and how they can stand out in a crowded market, so that they can more easily attract dream high-paying clients into their online nutrition business. This program is for brand new business owners and nutrition students, as well as those who have been in business for months or maybe even years, but aren't getting the traction that they'd like to see in their growth. Inside the NBA, you'll learn the most important foundational business building and marketing principles, not just the latest tools like social media, so that way you can experience sustainable business growth that adapts to the constantly changing world of online business. Over the course of 12 weeks, I'll show you how to attract high-paying clients who are excited to work with you and willing to pay you the rates that you deserve. You'll get training on how to effectively sell your services in a way that feels authentic and converts prospects into paying clients without feeling pushy or salesy. And you'll get step-by-step instructions on how to create programs and services that provide truly transformative results, leading to glowing testimonials and referrals from your current clients, so you can have the greater impact that you desire in the world around you. You'll also learn how to manage your time, your energy, and your resources so you can get more done in less time and experience the freedom that you really got into entrepreneurship for. When you apply what you learn in the NBA program, you'll never have to feel stuck or overwhelmed in your business again. Want to make this your reality? Then the Nutrition Business Accelerator is your pathway to achieve all of this and more. Get the proven strategy that has helped hundreds of business owners start, grow, and scale their nutrition businesses to $5,000 to $10,000 months and beyond, and accelerate your progress to build the nutrition business of your dreams. Go to lauraschoenfeld.com/NBA to learn more about the program and get your name on the wait list so that you can be the first to know when our doors are open for our next round. That's lauraschoenfeld.com/NBA, which is short for Nutrition Business Accelerator. If you have big dreams of running your own profitable and joy-filled nutrition business, you do not want to miss out on this one-of-a-kind business coaching opportunity. I can't wait to support you inside the NBA program.